From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. After the tumultuous omni-shambles of the last few Tory governments, Labour had promised the electorate a government of almost boring stability. But in 2025, that didn't quite go to plan.
Allies of Keir Starmer have privately accused UK Health Secretary Wes Streeting of plotting to replace the Prime Minister.
Tax rises, tax rises, tax rises. This is a tax bonanza of the likes that we have never really seen.
That was a really difficult watch. It appeared to me that Rachel Reeves was crying.
For Labour, it was a year of big resignations.
Rana has resigned as Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary.
And plummeting popularity.
A new survey by YouGov has found that just 17% of voters would back the Labour Party if a general election were held today.
It's been a tricky year for the Tories too.
Danny Kruger has become the second sitting MP in the first this Parliament to defect to Reform UK.
And so this is my tragic conclusion. The Conservative Party is over. The flame is passing from one torch to another.
And 2025 appeared to be the year when two-party politics was finally over, with all the attention being won by insurgent parties further along the spectrum on both the right and left.
Reform is now the largest membership political party in the United Kingdom.
My message to Labour is very clear. We are not here to be disappointed by you. We're here to replace you.
So what can we expect from Westminster in 2026? What are the big political events to watch out for? And how long do the party leaders have before their parties attempt to topple them? We've brought together two of our parliamentary experts to give us the lowdown as we look ahead to what promises to be another dramatic year in Westminster.
If that happens, it cements this narrative against Keir Starmer, which is that he's losing voters in all directions, and the ones he's pitching to directly aren't listening.
You know, you say that we're looking to May as the point where a leadership contest could kick off. To be frank, it has started. It started last year.
The story today, the storms coming for Starmer in 2026. Do you want to both just start by introducing yourselves?
Hi, I'm Geraldine Scott and I'm the Assistant Political Editor at The Times.
And I'm Aubrey Allegretti, Chief Political Correspondent of The Times.
Looking back over 2025, what were your political highlights and lowlights?
What shall I start with, highlight or lowlight? Let's go with lowlight, because then it can only get better, can't it? The big disappointment for me this year was the distinct lack of protesters, hecklers, stage invaders at the party conferences. Listeners will remember in years past we've had, banners held up, glitter thrown at the Prime Minister, things like that. And whilst I'm sure that was a highlight for the various political parties themselves, for me, it really took kind of the fun out of party conference season when there's not always too much fun to be had.
All the colour.
Yes, all the colour. My highlight, I coined a phrase this year, a political phrase, which was persistent knobheadery.
That's a good one to own.
This was when 4 Labour MPs lost the whip for voting against the government, organising rebellions, organising backbenchers against welfare reforms and things like that. But what a party source told me is that actually they'd been suspended for persistent knobheadery because it was a bit of a symptom of the fact that, there really wasn't much happiness on the Labour backbenchers at that point. Yes,
not much control from number 10.
Not much control. So, that's legacy building, if you ask me.
Aubrey?
So by far my biggest political lowlight has to be being scrambled to a Jaguar Land Rover factory, which number 10 gave us very sort of scant detail and notice of on the eve of the announcement of tariffs being imposed on the UK, which would have included sweeping hits to the steel industry. And we were sent to the wrong Jaguar Land Rover factory. So the entire lobby decamped to one side of Birmingham because number 10 had given us the incorrect address. And then we had to quite literally run and take taxis to and find our own way to Solihull instead, to the factory that the Prime Minister was visiting, so that we didn't miss the major sort of speech and press conference that he gave.
I hope someone got sacked for that.
No, I don't think they did. It caused a great deal of mirth in the journalists' WhatsApp group in the press gallery. So, you know, in some senses, this job does mean that you only understand SW1 and the postcode inside it. This was quite a fun experience of sort of running around the West Midlands.
What was your highlight?
I think the highlight has to be the weeks leading up to the Welfare Rebellion vote, where nobody had quite anticipated that Keir Starmer was capable of having his seemingly massive majority genuinely under threat. So far, previous to that, we'd had rebellions numbering in the sort of dozens, and Keir Starmer was almost inoculated and protected from any real prospect of defeat in the Commons. And that was the moment, I think, at which Labour MPs really found their voice and started speaking far more sort of freely and openly to us journalists. I think it was a bit of a watermark moment for them when they realised the power that they as individuals had over the Prime Minister and the party at large.
We are at the start of term in Westminster. As we look ahead to what 2026 is likely to bring, one of the big pivotal moments we're all looking towards is the local elections in May. And there are elections in Scotland and Wales too. Jerry, why are they such a big deal?
Yeah, all signs point to May, don't they? And actually, we already know from last year, we've already been obsessed with these elections. There are elections in Scotland and Wales as well, because they tell us something about the country's mood. And look, we always want to put this disclaimer on that local elections aren't the same as national elections, and you can't always kind of read across the results, but you can take the temperature of what the country is thinking. So everything in the run-up to May now is going to be obsessed with these elections. Afterwards is a really, really dangerous point if you are a party leader. It's dangerous for Keir Starmer because, you know, how these elections go might precipitate a leadership challenge for him. We're expecting Reform to do very well, so you can imagine that Nigel Farage will be trading out on that, and it'll be a test for Kemi Badenoch and the Greens and the Lib Dems as well. So they really are pivotal. And for this government in particular, you know, when you get to these elections in May, you're basically halfway through this government. Someone in Downing Street was saying to me the other day, how on earth has that happened that we're now basically halfway through? And, you know, I'm sure we'll come on to it later, but they have to start showing that they can deliver.
Aubrey, it does feel like within all the main parties there's been a sense that May is, you know, it's the big junction when you get to stop and work out if things are going to plan. Give us a sense of where the most jeopardy is. Which parties will see that as the moment they might want to institute change?
Certainly. So one of the easiest kind of metrics to view this through is looking at the number of seats up for grabs starting in the English councils. So Labour is contesting 47% of all seats. It by far and away has the most skin in the game, followed by the Conservatives, who hold 26%, the Lib Dems on 15%, others on 9%, the Greens on 3%, and Reform obviously on 0% because they haven't contested these councils before. Now, all of that means that the jeopardy for Keir Starmer is greatest, and Labour is fighting on a multitude of fronts. You've got London councils, which are up for grabs, where the Greens are making strong inroads, and we've recently seen a string of defections of sitting Labour councillors in London. The Tories are also pinning their sort of green shoots of a comeback in places like Westminster. And then you've got the potential rise of the likes of your party and pro-Gaza independents in Birmingham, where the city council is up for grabs. Labour's traditionally dominated there, but there's obviously the backdrop of the bin strike, the recent war in Gaza, and the emergence of Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana's party. Then you have the rise of Reform with all-outs in places like Sunderland, St Helens and South Tyneside, all areas where Reform actually came second at the general election in a handful of seats. So it's not just that Labour has the capacity to do poorly in a handful of areas, it's that if that happens, it cements this narrative against Keir Starmer, which is that he's losing voters in all directions and the ones he's pitching to directly aren't listening. I suppose the counterpoint I would make is that these are obviously being described as Keir Starmer's midterms, and we shouldn't be too fatalistic this early in the Parliament. Ed Miliband was obviously the biggest winner in the local elections prior to the 2015 general election, so we shouldn't take anything as a foregone conclusion, even if the Labour MPs briefing so hard against Keir Starmer are.
If you're Keir Starmer, thinking about both the May local elections where it's very hard for you to look like you've had a success, just because, I mean, they always go against incumbents anyway, but things aren't looking great for him across the country. You've got a threat, even in places like Wales, of reform catching up with you. What would it take for Keir Starmer to feel like this is the moment he might have to go? You know, people have talked about May being the test.
It's going to be incredibly tough for him. And we say it's a sort of foregone conclusion that governing parties are always sort of beaten up in these midterm elections. But of course, in the aftermath of 2019 and Boris Johnson's landslide majority, he was still winning in places like Hartlepool and did really, really well in the 2021 local elections. So it's not an argument to say, oh, well, you know, of course we're going to do badly. In Scotland, Labour's support has cratered. I mean, in the aftermath of the general election, they were nearly tied with the SNP on about 35% in the opinion polls in Holyrood. Now it's below 20%. At the end of 2025, they'd just been overtaken by Reform UK. Scottish MPs I've spoken to are particularly angry. I think they think that they have the most to lose. And some of them have just said that it can't get any worse. So they've described this idea of a putsch against Starmer before May. Wales is a very different kettle of fish. I imagine that Jerry's heard much the same, but senior UK government figures I've spoken to believe that Wales is likely a completely lost cause. Labour's polling poorly. It got 11% in the most recent polls for the Senedd, and it came obviously a distant third in the Caerphilly by-election last month. Labour's been in power for Wales for 100 years, obviously pre-devolution, so this will be a real watershed moment for them, which he is not going to be able to brush off and say, 'tis merely a flesh wound.
So it feels almost like a matter of time before a leadership struggle is launched within Labour. Aubrey, just remind us of the rules, because it is, you know, we've become very accustomed to a regicide within the Tory party and how that happens. What does it need within Labour's rules?
It's completely different. And you speak to Labour MPs that go, the Tories had it so easy because their threshold to triggering a leadership contest, albeit by a slightly peculiar route, was very different. Under the Conservatives, effectively, you had to have 10% of the parliamentary party suggest that they wanted a vote of no confidence in their leader. And it could all be done quite secretly. With the Labour Party, you have to have 80 people all on the record giving their support to a challenger candidate, which means that you need 80 people to be openly saying they want their Prime Minister to go and behind a single candidate.
Wow, and the rules are just so difficult. I mean, Jerry, if it does happen, how will they actually unseat him?
So, look, there are various ways that this could happen, but where I don't think we'll see it coming from is the grassroots. Look, I am not saying the grassroots are happy, but they've been unhappy for a while, and there really isn't a mechanism for them to get rid of Starmer, as Aubrey's just outlined. I think what is more likely is that you get multiple members of the cabinet go to Keir Starmer and say, look, you've completely lost the confidence of the party, and especially if you are one of those members of the cabinet that sees yourself as the next leader, because, you know, you say that we're looking to May as the point where a leadership contest could kick off. To be frank, it has started. It started last year. If you look at the kind of speeches, appearances that some senior cabinet members and people in the party are doing, it's very, very clear that if you see them straying outside of their brief, that is a pitch for leadership. It's already on.
Well, given that everybody in Westminster seems to think it's only a matter of time, we ought to look at the runners and riders. So, you know, one person who seems to have stuck their head above the parapet by saying things that are slightly off message is Wes Streeting. Certainly. What are his chances?
He's been a really interesting figure to watch because obviously he was very, very close to both Keir Starmer and then in some ways, more importantly, Morgan McSweeney. And we've seen that relationship really start to crumble over the last few months. At the end of last year, obviously, there were briefings about a very heated conversation between the pair of Wes Streeting and Morgan McSweeney over these accusations that Wes Streeting was effectively briefing very hard against the Prime Minister, which he denied.
This morning on Sky News, you said that you felt that you'd been kneecapped by Downing Street in terms of the briefing.
I think I said it was the most unwarranted attack on a faithful since Joe Marler was banished in the Traitors final. And I think whoever's been briefing this should spend a little less time watching Celebrity Traitors and a bit more time watching Country File.
He's kind of criticised the style a bit too, hasn't he, with this sort of managerial,
Yes, so we're sort of still lacking an answer to the question of what does a Wes Streeting leadership look like that is substantially different from a Keir Starmer one. And in many ways, what's interesting is that is his pitch, that he will be Starmer and the sort of Labour 2024 manifesto embodiment without the bad bits and with the added benefits of somebody who is charismatic, a good media performer, seen as credible, has a great, interesting backstory and has that sense of authenticity which so many other cabinet ministers are lacking, including Keir Starmer. However, when you look at the polling that's taken place over the last few months, someone like Ed Miliband, who is, of course, a former Labour leader and seen as being the sort of standard-bearer of the left inside the cabinet.
But the threat from reform goes way beyond their climate-denying agenda. You see, the truth is, I wish Nigel Farage was just the snake oil Tory city boy we've known about for years. He's actually morphed into something even more dangerous.
He is much more popular amongst the Labour membership. Now, interestingly, Wes Streeting doesn't do that much worse. He polls in second place. Then you have people like Angela Rayner, who obviously was sacked from the cabinet in September last year over £40,000 of unpaid stamp duty.
As tough as politics can be, it is nothing compared to what thousands of my constituents and this country face every single day. Yeah. And from wherever I sit on these benches, I will fight with everything I have to do exactly that.
And her biggest frustration really is that she hasn't yet gone through, in the words of one Labour MP, her redemption arc. And so the earlier there is a leadership contest, almost the worse for her. She needs it to be a little bit longer for her to be able to have gone through the motions of paying HMRC the fine, which by the end of 2025 she still hadn't done, and have sort of melted away and been seen to have done her time on the backbenches. You have other people as well, like Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, who's very quickly sort of been elevated up the sort of Labour rankings, and her allies are certainly canvassing colleagues for support in a possible leadership election.
It is an honour to address you for the first time as a Labour Home Secretary. It is an honour I never expected, and it is one that would have been unthinkable to my parents when they first arrived here in the 1970s.
And then you have outsiders, people like Andy Burnham, who is forever positioning himself as this king over the water, but I can't see any route for him getting a seat anytime soon.
When I left Westminster, which is almost 10 years ago now, I took a vow not to speak in code, to answer honestly. It's not up to me. It's not my decision. That's a matter for you, for the party in Parliament.
And you have some of the newer, sort of younger, fresher Labour MPs like Al Carnes, who was promoted and made a defence minister immediately upon becoming a Labour MP. He has several times touted himself to be Labour leader. He is an incredibly sort of new, fresh face to Parliament. He served as a Royal Marine and had been in the military throughout much of his career before.
Russia does not want us to know what they are doing, but we will not be deterred. And we will work with our allies to ensure that Russia knows that any attempt to disrupt or damage underwater infrastructure will be met with the firmest of responses.
He's got a really interesting backstory, and he does funny things like sort of climbing Mount Everest and running in the snow and posting videos of it. So
I think he managed to break a record climbing Everest while being a minister last year.
A Labour figure did say to me, it's about time we had a trained killer as Prime Minister.
Who knows? Maybe he'll be the unexpected winner. Jerry, May is obviously a really big marker. Beyond that, though, if they manage to get through that, are there major policy issues that Starmer will try and push through in order to save his skin almost? You know, what are the long-awaited bills that might still shift the dial?
Yeah, look, I've touched a little bit on this earlier, but the government knows that this is now the time where they have to start delivering things. And what that means is not just kind of in their policies, but also in how people feel. They're going to be focusing on things like the cost of living and trying to bring that down, but also trying to really big up some of their big ticket items. So there's a couple that we should kind of highlight. There's the Renters' Rights Bill, which is one of the big flagship policies of the government. The main thing that does is abolishes no-fault evictions. It also puts an end to fixed-term tenancies, gives tenants more rights over, challenging rent rises. I think this is still in there, gives tenants almost a right to have a pet, which I know sounds kind of superficial, but is the kind of thing that makes a difference to people's lives.
Yeah.
The other kind of side of the coin to that is the Employment Rights Bill, which I've done a lot of work on, which is a massive once-in-a-generation overhaul of workers' rights. And it does things like abolishes exploitative zero contracts, gives kind of day one rights on many, many things. It gives unions kind of sweeping powers in the workplace, gives them more access, takes down the threshold for calling strike action, all these type of things, and they will shout about that as being kind of a really, really big change that they say will benefit working people. Now, they have had to make some concessions on that.
I was going to say, is it being watered down already?
It has been watered down already. Businesses have pushed back quite heavily. The most recent concession we saw at the end of last year was pushing back when that right against unfair dismissal came in. At first, that was supposed to be a day one right. That now won't kick in until after 6 months. And, at the end of last year, we still saw this struggle between the Commons and the Lords, it going back and forth and really not agreeing. But once that gets through, they will herald that as a massive achievement.
On the other side, there is still a lot of pressure on them to do something about welfare, which has been a persistent problem with their own backbenchers. Is that likely to rear its head again in 2026?
Yes, and, we saw that big rebellion where the government was defeated over changes to welfare. They had to go away and really just completely strip out their bill, take all the things that would have saved money out of it. But Keir Starmer and Pat McFadden, now the Work and Pensions Secretary, have been clear that reforms are going to come back. I don't think Labour MPs are necessarily against the principle, but were against the plans that they tried to push through last year. So there's a lot of kind of threads to pull at here, but it seems clear they are going to come back on that welfare reform issue because it's just too expensive.
Ultimately, it'll be the cost of living crisis and the way people feel about the economy that will really determine this government's fate. Aubrey, any sign of that getting better?
Well, let's start
Are we
with the
seeing
good
any
news.
green shoots? is the economy growing?
Let's start with the good news. So there were several measures in Rachel Reeves's budget in November 2025 which are designed specifically to ease cost pressures on households. They include things like the rail fares freeze from January 2026, the energy bills cut from April that year, and delaying a lot of the spending cuts and big tax rises to later in the Parliament. So those are things like freezing income tax threshold, otherwise known as fiscal drag, and the introduction of the new EV tax. The bad news is that in its budget analysis, the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, was pretty scathing about the real change to what's known as real household disposable incomes over this Parliament, effectively saying that they would rise a pretty minuscule amount by historical standards. There is still a lot of difficulty ahead for Keir Starmer in terms of making people feel better off, particularly when inflation is so stubborn at around sort of 3.5%. And so I suspect that in the year ahead, the cost of living crisis will continue to be a significant pain for many families and households across the country.
So still a lot of challenges for Labour in this year. What about the others? Jerry, give us a quick report card for Kemi Badenoch. She seemed to have a better end of 2025 than her start in the job. Will she last the whole of this year?
Shall we give her a C if we were going to score her? I fear that ages me, actually, because haven't they changed it from A to C to numbers? I have no idea what it is
stars
now.
And all sorts of things that none of us understand.
Or the Ofsted ratings, we should use those instead.
I think I'd give her a C, and I would say I would say that she has exceeded expectations, and that isn't...
How bad were expectations?
Well, I was
if
going to
she's
say,
a
this
C?
isn't necessarily a compliment, because I think the expectations were very low. But we have seen her improve. Her performance at PMQs, for example, has improved significantly. It sounds like she might have had some people come in to kind of help her prepare for that and to hone her kind of skills.
And may I congratulate the Right Honourable Lady on delivering her second budget. I hope she enjoyed it, because it really should be her last.
It sounds like she might have some better policy people around her. It seems like she's stabilised the Tory finances a bit by getting rid of their headquarters and pitching up somewhere else. A lot of her MPs are pretty happy with how she's doing at the moment when you speak to them. That's not to say that continues, of course. It is still early days, but we're not in the kind of fevered land of leadership speculation that we were a few months ago.
And Jerry, you follow Reform quite closely too. They've obviously been leading in the polls for months now. Is 2026 going to be their year?
This is a really interesting question, because there is a school of thought which says that Reform have a ceiling. You know, they're still riding high in the polls. They're regularly 10 points clear of Labour in first place. But at the end of last year, that had started to dip slightly. And the problem that they may face is that Nigel Farage is Marmite. You know, that if you love him, yeah, you probably love him. But if you don't like him, if you hate him, you might vote for any other party to keep him out and do that kind of tactical voting thing. So for me, that doesn't mean they won't continue to succeed. I think in May, there are a lot of people that won't have had the chance to vote for Reform who might want to. So, look, I don't think they're going anywhere, but I think there is a question to be asked about how much support can they get.
And Aubrey, while Labour seems to be hemorrhaging support in parts of the country, as you said earlier, the Greens seem to be doing remarkably well. How does 2026 look for them?
Yes, 2026 is probably for the taking for the Greens. I mean, they've obviously got a new leader, Zach Polansky, who's known as this kind of firebrand. He's an eco-populist, and he really seems to have rejected the previous Greens strategy, which was cautiously trying to gradually build the Greens base up from having a very wide spread of support. And his approach seems to be throwing caution completely to the wind, emulating almost a sort of Jeremy Corbyn style mass audience presentation.
Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society, and then the Tories over 14 years shut the community centres down. How do you expect people to integrate if they've got nowhere to gather together, to pray together, to eat together, even to disagree together?
And so that is kind of the most interesting thing for me, to see how that mass appeal and support really translates under first-past-the-post systems, which have traditionally held the Greens back before. But certainly Labour MPs are worried about the surge of the Greens, particularly in London, and they think that, again, Zach Polansky has something which is authenticity and being able to cut through with voters, so they can talk about migration, they can talk about the economy and how it's still not benefiting people on lower incomes in their view, and they can talk about green issues as well. Particularly with the introduction of things like an EV tax, they can claim that the government is going soft on those issues.
And it's funny that we're talking about the Greens before we're talking about them, but the Lib Dems, is this a year where they might actually make an impact? Are they likely to do well in the polls?
The Lib Dems are, I think, one of the biggest curiosities of this parliament, which is kind of under-talked about and under-reported. They should be the natural inheritors of dissatisfaction and frustration with the main two-party system. But instead, they've stayed almost exactly static in the opinion polls. Now, they can claim that they've still been very successful. They came second last year to Reform in the local elections. It was the first time ever that they beat Labour and the Tories. They think they can do that again in the local elections this year. But all of that said, I genuinely detect a lot of frustration and anger from Liberal Democrat MPs who frequently say to me, Ed Davey is failing to capitalise on the very clear opportunities being presented to us by both Labour and the Conservatives being fairly weak. And they don't like the idea that Farage is the natural inheritor of that. So there are genuinely some Lib Dem MPs who say there will be changes to all major party leaders next year, Labour, the Tories and our party as well, because they're so frustrated with Ed Davey.
Basically, this is going to be another bumpy year for politics and all of you in Westminster.
Yes, I think it's going to be fun. And I think, how that new reality that we live in with multiple parties is going to be fascinating to cover. What those power struggles look like is going to be fascinating as well. And, it's going to be a big year, and the Times will continue to bring you the news.
That was Gerry Scott, Assistant Political Editor at The Times, and Aubrey Allegretti, Chief Political Correspondent. You'll be able to find all of their reporting at thetimes.com. The producer today was Harry Stott. The executive producer and sound designer was Taryn Siegel. Our theme was composed by Mal Assetto. Thanks for listening, and once again, because it can't be said enough, Happy New Year.